Alright, hey everybody. It's Mind Circus here, and we are on our third of our little video tips here. This one is a pretty hard topic, but every time I was talking to anybody about adding or about doing more of these tutorials, basically what I got from people was we'd really like to see one on text. Everybody said that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about it, give a couple of demonstrations about some things, and hopefully, put you on the road to where you want to be when it comes to adding text to your avatars. The first thing I'm going to say is that I wish I had a magic bullet for you. I don't. I spend a good 25% of the time spent on every avatar, and as I mentioned before, I'll go up to 2 hours on any given avatar. I'll spend a quarter of that time just placing text, choosing font, moving it around, and basically making busy work out of it. It can be a real chore. But there are a couple of things I can add to the discussion, I'm hoping. I was specifically talking to Maria about it, and I just said, look, the only real tip is take time. So I'm going to just say that first. Take your time with your text. If you don't have the time to fiddle through a bunch of fonts and the way you're styling it, then maybe you need another hobby. Because that is one of the killer long aspects of this. The other thing I'm going to say is that I make my text really simple. I have my go-to fonts just like everybody else. I have those 5 or 6 fonts that tend to end up on maybe a few more avatars than they should. But that's no crime. I don't use Photoshop. I don't use the text styling in there. I find that the text styling, I don't want to come off as a snob, but text styling can often be a real crutch for people. And even with all those text styles, I see those people with Photoshop making the same mistakes as everybody else does. Unreadable text, overly affected text, etc. So let's get to it. Before I go off on a rant. Basically what we're going to talk about here at this point first is about contrast. So I've picked up a couple of different pictures off the web first. I picked up this one, which looks very similar to something you'd probably see on an avatar, and you see a bit of this grungy work on some of them too. So especially I guess some of mine, I'll do a lot more grungy stuff than other people because I'm grimy like that. Anyway, here we go. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm obviously just going to say name here, and I'm going to make it big enough so that we can actually read it, and then we'll take a look at a few different factors. Now, first off, when I put this down here, I've got some white text with a black stroke around it. And one of the reasons I chose this picture, because it really does illustrate a couple of points. For us to make text stand out on an avatar, we need to be really conscious of where we're putting that text in terms of its background. We need to establish some kind of contrast between the text and the background layer itself. And if we put it over here, we can see this stands out really nicely over here. And that's kind of what I'm saying, is that light text against a dark background is naturally going to stand out. If we put that white text over here, obviously it doesn't stand out nearly as well, but we see this kind of problem on avatars all the time. So establishing a bit of contrast between the actual, color values in the text versus its surrounding area is the first thing that we want to look at. Now, if we had this back over here, there are ways to overcome this problem of it fading into its background. One of the quick things that you see some avatar makers do, and I've done this before myself, is we'll put an area down here and fade that. We get kind of a nice effect at that point where we've got that bar back behind the text, and its real purpose is to just kind of make that text pop a little bit more. I do this all the time. It's a very workable solution, and it starts to look fairly professional once we get it out there. So that's one way you can do it. And obviously, if we bring this over here and we bring the text over there into the darker area, we'll see that it doesn't quite have the same effect, and really all it does is blacken things. But that might be what we wanted to. We could also go down here and just fade this out a little bit. Does it really do anything at that point? Not a whole lot, but it is an option for us, and we could be using colors, etc. to demo this as well. Now, the next thing that we'll take a look at then is just another way to kind of overcome the problem. So just delete that. And if you watched my last of these tips, I showed you the ghetto drop shadow. So let's try that ghetto drop shadow here and see what comes out of it. So again, I will duplicate the layer. I will adjust its brightness and contrast until the text itself is black. Then I'll place the black layer under the other layer, and I'll adjust the blur by Gaussian blurring that. 10 pixels. That's not bad. Duplicate it again. Might be a little much. Now we have 2 layers of drop shadow, as you saw me do that there, to kind of thicken it up. When we hit 2, it was too much, so again I can just fade the opacity of one of those 2 layers until I get it where I want. And there I have it. Now let's take a look at that. That stands out really well there under that area, and it's a quick and down and dirty effect that will just do that one thing you needed to do. This would work even better, and let me just show you this really quickly as I merge the 2 shadow layers. I'm going to grab that shadow layer, and let's even put it up here where there's slightly less contrast. And that starts to pop nicely in there, and the shadow doesn't create as much of a problem. In fact, you kind of have to be looking for it at that point. So let's try something else now. At that point, I'm going to just bring us back to where we're only at text. And let's take this text and put it back over this area, and let's look at the reverse of the ghetto drop shadow, which of course would be the ghetto glow. I know, sounds very awesome. So we're going to duplicate the layer, adjust its brightness and contrast, and instead of making it all black, we're going to tilt it all the way to the other side where we now have a white layer. And as before, we'll take that white layer, put it underneath the text, and adjust its blur with a Gaussian blur filter. And again, about 10 is a good demo of that, and boom, there we have it. A little bit of a glow around your text. And if we take that glow layer at this point, we can fade that out a little bit so it isn't quite as noticeable. And then we have that text kind of blending in with a bit of a halo around it, which can be attractive at points. So there's a couple of basic tips there at this point. Let me kill this file and go over to the other one. Now here's our other one, and this is very similar to what I tend to see on the back of avatars, etc. Let's talk about the second problem that I see with text, and that's what I call the look what I can do factor. And you know what I'm talking about. It's that person with their freshly pirated version of Photoshop CS 5 million and comes in and realizes how easy it is to apply a few enhancements to the text, and really it just starts to overshadow the entire thing. So what we'll do here is we will again make our text, which oddly enough I managed to put on the layer below where I intended it, and there's our text. What I'll do here is just apply the same kind of effect there. Now look what I can do happens a lot with the font choices. If we take a look at this font choice here, let's actually make this a little closer to a real world scenario and give this font some color. And if we do that, then we'll have a better idea what I'm trying to get at. So I'm just going to put kind of a dark stroke around kind of this nice powder blue. And there we have it. Now, this gets lost, absolutely gets lost, because of course we don't have any contrast between the background and the foreground. But if we go ahead and invert that, that'll do for the moment for what we're trying to demonstrate. So we have our name in there. It's almost good. I'd probably make a case for the ghetto glow there. But what I really want to show you with this one is how easy it is to get things lost if we're using very crazy fonts. Scripted fonts get lost really quickly in our background. If you notice, I have quite a few different fonts on my computer. Okay, so here's a good example. We'll take out the bit in the middle, and what we'll even do here, and you can see the stroke is totally killing the value of the font in here, and we'll put this in here. Now, again, this font is very different than the last one. And of course, I've misspelled name. And as a result, it's actually, just by the nature of the font, getting lost in the background. We need to keep that in mind. Some fonts are going to stand up better in certain ways than others do, depending on their thickness and the amount of cursives they have. This obviously is a very cursive font and very similar to what we see on a lot of female avatars, but it's immediately getting lost in the background. Now, can we compensate for that? Absolutely. Let's duplicate the layer. Let's adjust its brightness and contrast. Again, if you have a drop shadow filter, just be using that. And let's go ahead and blur that. And there we see it starts to pop. And that starts to pop. And all I'm doing is duplicating that blur layer to give it more of a value in there. And there it starts to become okay. But if we start applying text styles to a font like this, we're just asking for a world of hurt. If we, though, go to a different font, and let's just try doing that fairly quickly, we'll probably find that that other font may not require as much to pop it out of the background, and in fact may not even require anything at all. We may be able to put our stroke back on this one and hit it. So I think what I'm driving home here is the real need to be judicious with your fonts, be judicious with your styles, make sure that they're not going into the background.